Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love, alongside my co-host Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley, who's not here yet, but I hope will be joining us soon. Our guest this week is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. She is a clinical psychologist and the author of Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, which I have here. And thank you. I have a signed copy, so I'm so thrilled to have that. And Dr. Chloe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charles and Shamika. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, we talked briefly before we started about, well, how did we connect and why did I reach out? Because I reached out to you and why I reached out to you. And I talked about the interesting people that I try to find. You got to spin Twitter into something positive, right? And so there are a lot of people on there. And the loud, squeakiest wheels can be kind of on extremes, but there's some people, pretty sensible people out there. So I looked for them and found some of your stuff. I found some videos of you and you talking about masking and these types of things. And then I went and Googled and saw some other things. I said, this would be a great guest. And, you know, shockingly enough, you had heard of us. That was great. But we'll talk about the book for sure. But I wanted to talk about a few things that's going on now that we as a country are dealing with, and some things that you can probably put a fine point on before we get to the book. So one of the things I saw, and you blog about it, was the issues with masking, particularly on kids long term. And so talk a bit about why that's a problem. You don't have to go into great detail because we talk about that a lot, but particularly why no one in your profession is talking about why it's a problem.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I will even tell you an interesting story, Charles, about how my own profession actually tried to intimidate me into taking down my blog and my statements about that stuff. So, you know, just to say, I cannot stand the idea of covering up the nose and mouth of little children. I don't like it for adults. I think it's antisocial. But for little teeny children, as a clinical psychologist, I know that we have these things in our brain. They're called mirror neurons. And just like the name implies, the mirror neurons will reflect whatever face they see. So if I'm very happy and you make a sad face, I'm not going to feel sad, but I'll physically register that presence of sadness. And it's the neurological underpinning of empathy. So when we cover that up in the child, we're failing to stimulate that part of their brain. And they are at a critical window where they are learning to read social expressions. Moreover, there's an issue of self-esteem, because if a child frowns and an adult comes over and says, hey, Junior, let me help you, what's also happening there is the child is getting a message that his community sees him and he matters. It's not that the adults don't care, but they're just literally unaware of what's even going on with him. And the child is just not processing all of that, right? I mean, I could go on and on, but let me just tell you, I wrote this whole thing. It's at maskharms.com. And when I wrote it, I shared it with my own colleagues before I really pushed it out there. And I asked them, can you please give me some constructive criticism on this? Is there something I'm missing here? Because I feel like it's weird that no other psychologists, or at least not that I knew of, like, we're talking about this. And you won't believe what they said. They came back and they said, you know, everything in your blog makes sense on a scientific level, like no factual disputes, but we think you should take it down because there are moms with guns showing up at school board meetings, and we feel like your blog could just inflame them, and there's insurrectionists out there, and this kind of thing could spur them on. And I said, okay, first of all, I'm a mom. I go to school board meetings and I actually own guns, you know, but I was like, but no, I would absolutely never, you know, take it to the level of violence. You know, I don't understand why my scientific, you know, blog about some of these issues would ever be used as an excuse for violence. Moreover, as a clinical psychologist, I said to my colleagues, I was like, we of all people should know that if we squash dialogue and we don't let people talk, that's when they're actually more prone to act out with violence. Again, not that I think anybody should be doing that. But so anyway, it's funny you mentioned that about my colleagues, because that was the reaction I got from my own like trusted and respected colleagues.
Wow. I think, Shamika, I'd love to hear your comments on that. But two, I also would like you to do this thing that, only Shamika can do. But, with your one-liners and your really honest and kind of punches of truth. But do that. I want you to kind of take a cut the bull victory lap for a moment. We don't do that. It needs to be a new segment because, we make some really salient points on this show. And I can remember back the first time we did a show on masking way back in the beginning. And obviously, you were against masking and vaccination. I mean, you're Black, so of course you were against all that shit. But beyond that, right at the beginning, I know we were having a dialogue about this, and I was like, I just want to know, and I'm not saying anybody's wrong to be concerned about COVID and these other things. I want to know why no one, the smart people in the room, the people with the letters behind their names, right? Why no one's doing a cost benefit analysis and taking all the bad, we could all die, it could be airborne, all that stuff that they were considering, which is totally fine to do, it's smart. But then also say, well, what happens if babies can't see faces? What happens if people become antisocial? What happens to the kids when they can't go to school and they're not learning? What happens to all these other factors? And people were just like, if you bring that up, you must want everyone to die. And they just kind of said you were crazy and tried to silence you. So we were kind of at the forefront, but talk a bit about that and what she faced with them saying, remember what she said, it was factually accurate, it was scientifically sound, but please don't post it because a woman came to a meeting with a gun once.
Yeah, that is hilarious to me because okay, like moms, we are getting sick of this and we are tired of the foolishness. And I'm interested in hearing what she has to say simply because you are a doctor of psychology. And I have seen babies as young as 7 months old in masks. And I have wondered, how do you, where's the communication between the parent and the child? Just when you get into the baby's face and you're like, hi, they don't get to see that when they're covered in masks. And I feel like when we were going through the height of COVID and everybody wanted to always have a mask on, people became so evil and mean, and I feel like they were just doing all types of crazy things because you wouldn't know who they are because they have a mask on. This lady actually ran my daughter with a shopping cart because she felt like she was too close to her. And I couldn't even go and find her, although I got in my car and tried, because my daughter couldn't identify her because she had a mask on. And I just feel like it just made people really not connect with one another and be mean and be evil and very nasty. And it was almost like when people started to get brave and come out of the mask, there was like a sigh of relief. I remember this lady telling me at the grocery store, oh my God, it's so nice to see a face again. And I was just thinking, why did we allow them to take that away from us? Of course, most of the time I was unmasked, but there were certain places, of course, in the airport, you have to be masked or, we're on the plane, because in the airport, I pretend like I can't hear the things that come across the intercom. But I don't even understand how we got to the point where we felt like that was okay. And I was just at a funeral. When I talk about the seven-month-old, like this just happened a couple months ago. And I'm thinking now it's starting to kind of die down and we are still masking babies. It's a concern of mine. And of course, I'm a nobody. They're not going to listen to me. But why aren't more people like yourself really speaking up? That says a lot, and it really pisses me off that they aren't brave enough to come forward and actually speak up for the kids. So the moms at the school boards with the guns, way to go, because somebody has to actually pop off and set it off and get this thing started right.
Yeah, you make a good point, Shamika, about actually depersonalizing. That's what they do is they depersonalize us. And, to your point also about, people's own behavior becoming more callous towards each other, it makes sense because, again, with facial expressions being the way that we show each other, like how we feel, if you say something mean to me and you see the hurt on my face, that kind of like makes you check and be like, oh wow, maybe I'll go a little gentle, right? But when everybody's masking up, and to your point, it's not only that they're masking the babies sometimes, which by the way, unfortunately, Mayor Eric Adams in New York City bringing it back on the toddlers, I think is sick. But then I also see moms, masking, right? So even if their baby's not masked, mom is masked. And, studies show, it's no secret that infants watch faces. They're watching faces. They're learning how to communicate, and they're emotionally regulating by looking at, the face of the most trusted person around them, oftentimes their mother. And when we cover that up, what on earth do we think is going to happen? The thing that even bothered me a lot too, and at the beginning, by the way, I was okay with masking because, like you said, Charles, I mean, we didn't know like necessarily what was going on here. So like everybody else, I just followed directions. But after a while, it started to really bother me. I would hear like, quote, experts say, well, there's never been a study that has showed that masks have caused a problem in toddlers. And the reason for that is because no study had ever been done, because you could never get such a study approved in the past, because on its face, as they would say, that kind of study would sound ridiculous and deplorable, to do that to kids. So anyway, it does feel good to talk about it because it really got my blood up.
Well, one other thing the two of you said that made me think of something. A while back, we spoke with Chris Ferguson, and he came to my defense on Twitter. I got into a debate with somebody about something factually inaccurate and completely stupid. You may remember which thing, racism being a mental, it was something that the APA had put out there, right? So as a fact, and we study, and we're like a group of psychologists, and we decide this. And I said, well, that's just silly. And the guy was like, but they're a group, not one, but a group of doctors. You're one guy. I was like, well, they're a group of idiots. I mean, common sense is, if they're all doctors and they tell me the sandwich is water, I'm not going to drink it. And so I said, but he's like, but this organization, he's talking about the APA. And I'm like, well, you're not misunderstanding the fact that they've changed over the years and they have an ideology now. And he's like, he didn't believe so. And Chris was like, yeah, that's true, which is why I'm probably going to get rid of my membership, this, that, and the other. And he was talking about that. So it kind of, lends itself to two things that you said earlier. I want to know, why is it that if regardless of the type of science, right? If you're a scientist, if you're a person that studies information, numbers, it would be like an actuary, right? It's not a doctor, but his job it's morbid sometimes, right? To say in certain situations based on this climate and this population and this period of time, how many of these people are going to die? You don't say, well, I'm going to put my thumb on the scale of the white or the black people. You just give the information. And so I'm wondering what you think about the fact that they aren't just, and to be fair, I want to say this again. I don't think this is a problem with someone thinking that something is an issue and studying that. So I can think that Black women are being mistreated in a certain sector, and I think I can do a study to prove it. The problem is if I do the study fairly, which for some is a problem, but most of them will do that to give them the credit. But what they do is they do it fairly and they don't get the results that they want. So they either tweak the study or just never release the results.
You're right.
So why is it that people are willing to do that in groups? Now I can get one-offs, but groups are doing this. And obviously you think it's problematic, but what does it do for these organizations and these groups down the road? Like people may be reluctant to go and seek therapy when they need it. Will they be more so now because they're like, I don't really trust these? Wait, the therapists, those are the same people that said, oh, Black women, can't get a job, said something extreme. Doesn't it hurt?
Absolutely, absolutely, it hurts, Charles. And for example, I actually spoke for a group called FACE, which is Families Advocating for Campus Equality, about young men being falsely accused of sexual misconduct. And I, sat with a room of, a dozen young men that had faced that. And it was heartbreaking to me that they all shared that they had tried to go to therapy to talk about the trauma of the false accusation. And every single time the therapist would turn the tables and say, well, basically you did it, right? So, I mean, you're right.
Or if you didn't do it, you would have done it.
Yeah, my own profession is nuts. But I mean, to your point also about, so groups of doctors or, the APA said this, we have to remember, right? Groups of doctors also told women that they could smoke during pregnancy and that cigarettes were healthy, or that a fetus is a clump of cells, right? So when people say, quote, trust the science or that kind of thing, we have to really understand, especially when it comes to social sciences, that's coming, with a lens of bias. And, Charles, you are 100% right. I think you've been the fly on the wall in some of the psychology labs where I've worked, because as a student, I have seen it happen where the results come back and it's not, what the lead investigator was expecting. And, they basically just kind of throw it in the garbage, so to speak. And even for myself, when I was a student and needed to get hours and build my network working under different psychologists and get certain types of credits and things, I would just sing kind of whatever song they wanted to sing. I would even say to them sometimes, like, hey, I looked at the data and I actually feel like, and I actually even worked in some labs that were focused on some of these sensitive subjects. And I would sometimes try to bring it up that I felt like maybe there was a different story that the data were telling. And I have had some of those, prestigious investigators even say to me literally, Chloe, that's not the narrative we're looking at, that's not the point that we're looking at, right? And I just want to say, I think they're good people. I think they're coming from a place where they believe that they are helping, quote, marginalized populations, et cetera. They don't think about the idea that what they're doing is essentially hanging a giant victim label on certain people. And maybe it's their own, white guilt or whatever that makes them feel like this is their way of, not being part of the problem or something. But there is a thing in psychology called groupthink, where when you get a whole bunch of people together and everybody's afraid to say, hey, wait a minute, I think we're going in the wrong direction, then what happens is that people become irrational. And I think that's exactly the problem in a lot of these psychology studies coming out today.
Shamika, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have a question. So have they done a study on what the masking does to the child's, like, maybe brain? And I'm asking that because, like, if I have a mask on for too long, I start to get a little bit dizzy. It's like I'm a little foggy. I don't feel like I'm thinking straight. And it concerns me of the children that have to sit in masks all day, 8 hours a day. I even notice adults, like when I go to the school, they will go in their office or go to the break room and they have their mask pulled down. And so they are taking those breaks. But every time you turn around, they're making sure that child, pull it up over your nose, pull it up over your nose. And I'm like, are we even doing any type of study to see how this is affecting them? 8 hours just sitting in there, I would think it's really causing something going on with their brain, because they're not getting, I would think, as much oxygen as they should, just from my own observation of myself.
Yeah, Shamika, I think that's a really good question. Unfortunately, my guess is that those types of studies are not published or funded, et cetera. But I was actually a yoga teacher before I became a clinical psychologist. And so, I mean, it's so funny. It's ridiculous. Like you said, it's easy for people to understand that deep breathing is helpful. We take deep breaths, we get our oxygen, we feel our best, we function and perform at our best. But yeah, I mean, I literally moved to Florida to avoid masking my son. Like, that's how strongly I feel about this. And the rare occasions when I have been forced to wear, that thing over my face, I agree with you, Shamika. I feel the same way. Like, I can't breathe right. I can't think right. It's distracting. So I think you're right. I think you're onto something.
So to the part earlier when I was talking about balancing things at the beginning of COVID, they could have taken all the potential problems and weighed them, but they had to have something on the other side to say, is this going to make matters worse? It made me think about something else. We have a psychologist here. You can help us unpack this. There's some, on the show, we talk a lot about the culture, and there's some cultural shifts that really have me pretty dismayed. Sometimes we talk race a lot, but everything doesn't have to do with race. Part of it is this problem with I think they were doing with COVID, trying to avoid all negativity, all possible bad things, and kind of shield yourself from everything that could be negative in order for that to be the direction we take to make things better or to live a happier and better life. So it goes to the safe spaces on campus. It goes to don't talk about the bad parts of masking because we want everybody to be fearful, because then they'll do the things we want them to do because we're trying to keep you safe. So what are you seeing in society today that's problematic from that front? And how bad do you think it's gotten? Because I think it's pretty bad. And from a mental health standpoint, where do you think we're going if people just keep thinking that they can create perfection and eliminate all possible negativity?
Wow, I mean, there's so many directions I could go with that one, Charles. Okay, so I'm going to say one, but you tell me if you were, thinking of something else, because I'm very curious about, what's on your mind in that regard. But
Okay.
The thing that comes to mind for me is this idea that if we just keep giving, offering rather, not even insisting, but offering, quote, services to people who are mentally ill and committing violent crimes, repeatedly in society, that is supposedly going to take us to some kind of a utopian, wonderful society that's going to in any way be better for anybody, right? That would be one thing that comes to mind, because I personally don't think it's good for society or even for that mentally ill person, to just be constantly out there committing violent crimes and then bounced right back out on the street and essentially given a pass because of their mental illness.
Trigger alert, trigger alert. Everything you said is totally 100% correct. But I got to get up on my little soapbox now. But I need your help, because you can probably help me with this, because this was in your vein. I say this a lot. Maybe you can correct me, or you can give it some the credibility it needs. So I think that, where there's an issue with mental illness, we need to try to address it. All the things you said about that is true. But I'm finding another weird new strand of thinking. And it's that when they talk about crime, they can equate it to the gun if they're anti-gun. It's like the gun shot the guy, like the gun ran out the house and just shot somebody, right? Or they can equate it to white supremacy or racism. They have no problem doing that, but they never want to give it to the person who does it, who's doing the violent act. But the few times they do, it's always mentally ill. And I sit back and I think, well, I'm not a psychologist or MD. I'm not, some guy who studies stuff, but I got a strong sense of common sense. Now, I find it hard to believe that everyone who commits a violent crime is mentally ill. I also think it's unfair to the mentally ill to act like the large percentage, like you want to say what percentage of blacks commit crime or what percentage of women, which is lower than men that commit crime. People with mental illness may commit crime at a higher rate than regular people, but they're not at 90%. So I think looking at the numbers and looking at what people are saying, they are putting too much weight on the mental illness by assuming that every time there's and I'm not just talking about a homeless person that may have issues on the subway in New York. We've seen that firsthand. That percentage might be higher, but they label it for everything. A drive-by shooting, 50, 18-year-olds running into the Neiman Marcus. You're right. It's like, so that's just the easy answer today. It's like, if we get a handle on poverty and mental illness, crime will go away. As if there's no people just doing it because of the opportunity, because they're bad people or other reasons. So am I wrong? And is there just this large, massive, growing number of mentally ill people who are out there doing drive-bys?
No, I mean, Charles, of course, anybody would say that they had a mental illness, right? If they knew that it was essentially, a get out of jail free card, like literally and figuratively, right? So, I mean, if you're a criminal and you're out there to break boundaries and basically take as much as you can and avoid responsibility, and you know that everybody has some kind of a chip on their shoulder to prove that they're gentle on the mentally ill and that they're, quote, compassionate, of course, you would just simply make that up and say that, right? And I personally have worked in psychiatric emergency rooms in some extremely, tough places. I'm not going to, name any names because I don't want to get in any big trouble, but I can tell you I've worked with people that you've seen in the newspaper, some of those gruesome, violent crimes that get, admitted to the psychiatric emergency room. When I was a trainee, I was the person in some of those places, and it would break my heart to see, ugly stuff like, stabbings, brutal stuff, right? And I can understand it, right? Like the first time, right? That somebody says, hey, this person has a psychotic disorder. They cannot tell reality. They were, having a psychotic break, and that's why they stabbed this 5-year-old child, 10 times, right? Once is a tragedy. It's of course, but then that person, in my view, gets at the most one pass. And then they learn to say, okay, you must take this medication every day for the rest of your life, or else you could do another heinous crime like this again. If that person then, which I've seen more times than I can even count, and probably many of us have if you just simply open the newspaper, if that person then chooses to go off their meds, that's their fault, in my opinion. That is on them, the next time. And so we want to respect the rights of people, including the mentally ill, of course, to make their own choices and live their own lives. But with rights come responsibilities. And it is not fair to anybody, certainly not society, but not even to that violent, mentally ill criminal, to just act as if their mental illness in some way necessitates that this is the pattern that their life is going to have and that they can't be held responsible.
Shamika?
No, I'm sitting here just thinking of the people that I know that maybe
the crazy criminals,
Yeah, the crazy people that I know. So the Asians have this saying, I learned this in massage school. They can tell people that are mentally ill by whether or not they have this deep crack going down the center of their tongue. Have you ever heard that?
I never have.
Asians? Yeah.
No, I've never heard it, but that's interesting.
So when I meet people, I really try to look in their mouth to see if they have this, deep crack down the center of their tongue, because the Asians say this is a dead giveaway that they have some type of mental illness. So I don't know. My mind was just going through the people like, is there a way to tell, like first meeting someone that they could have something going on mentally, or you need to have like a really deep study with them?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that, but to Charles's point, even about the subway, there are people, okay, as unfortunately most every woman who rides the New York subway, we have all had that man, that quote, mentally ill man, pull it out and do all this crazy stuff, on the subway, right? It doesn't take a deep look, right, to understand what's wrong with that person, right? And my issue is that there are so many people walking around, that are violently, flagrantly, aggressively, mentally ill to the point where they are hurting people, and they're not being held accountable. They're being taken in and treated and kind of excused. And I've worked in the places where they are released to as well, like the day treatment programs, where they then have to go for like maybe 6 months or whatever and show that for 6 months, they're doing fine. And then, maybe then they're allowed to just kind of manage their own life, and then they go off their meds and then they do it again. And it's almost like an annual event, right? And I think it's also unfair to society. As we all know, there's very high levels of depression in our society. And psychologists will sometimes say that in some cases, not all cases obviously, but in some cases, depression is anger that has been turned against the self, anger that for some reason couldn't be outwardly expressed. And so we turn it against ourselves, and it kind of shows up as depression. I think that society feels like it can't be, for whatever reason, angry at these mentally ill, crimes of somebody's 100th stabbing, right? They don't feel that they have permission to be angry with that person. Or frankly, I think a lot of Americans feel like they don't have permission to be angry with China, right? And so then that little anger, it kind of just boomerangs because we can't just let it out. It just stays inside and it troubles us. And as a psychologist, I wonder if that's what's happening sometimes in our society.
That's really good, though, because just thinking about people that I know have suffered from depression, or they say they suffer from depression, I could see the correlation between being angry. Like a lot of times they aren't people who speak up, or they've had some horrible things done to them where they weren't in a position to be able to speak out and speak up for themselves. And so I could actually see that in just the personal people that I know. And I also want to say I've had people pull it out too, and it's not on the subway.
And I want to say that all those people aren't mentally ill, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You're right. Even if they say that to, kind of get a lighter sentence. Yeah.
But we have to focus a little bit more time on something you said, because it's so important and it's so rarely said. And I thank you for that. And you're right. This you do write about in the book. You talk about the personal responsibility to mental health, and you just said that, talked about that a bit, but people need to understand. I think that, again, on the show, we talked about this, and I remember Will and I were talking about something when we talked about crime and this kind of thing, and reduced sentencing and all that kind of thing. And I'm like, look, I have no problem with giving people more chances for nonviolent offenses than you do for violent offenses. But there's a couple issues here. One is that the soft on crime people, they want to change what the definition of nonviolent is. So like the new DA in Manhattan said, pulling a gun on somebody. I think pistol whipping somebody is not violent, right? Because the bullet didn't come out of the chamber, so it's not violent. That's crazy. But then to the mental health piece, though, I already said my piece about them assuming everyone's mentally ill when they're not. But I think that Dr. Chloe was getting to this point too, in that we give these people chances. We try to give them the help we need. We all say, okay, let's find out what the help they need is and assess it. But to be totally honest, Michael Schellenberger's book about the sicko would probably point this out as well. When it comes down to brass tacks, if we make this political left-right, and the right gave in and said, we give you everything you want, we give you all the money, we give you all the beds, we give you all the clinics, we give you everything you need, there will still be homeless people that say, I've been living on the street for 20 years. I don't want to stay in a place. And so he goes on the street anyway. Those people will never say, well, unfortunately, because now we have the money, we have the clean facilities, we have the drugs, we have the bed, we have everything we need to help you. The trade-off was, you don't have a right to sleep on the streets. I, as a conservative, am willing to make that deal 10 times out of 11. But I know that I will never have to make the deal, because the left will never say, okay, Charles, and follow through with the, and no one can stay on the streets part. They always feel, well, they have rights and you can't snatch them out the streets. You can't make them take their meds. Even if we know that if they don't take their meds, violent, take the meds, fine, functioning. But you can't force them anyway. So isn't that what you mean? Part of what you're talking about?
That is exactly what I mean. You can't give people personal responsibility. They have no control of themselves because they are mentally ill, so they can't do it even if they wanted to. Exactly. So if somebody is going to refuse to take medication and insist on their autonomy, then they should also autonomously take responsibility for whatever the hell they do, when they are off their meds, if that's the choice that they make. And, moreover, I think it's really disempowering to, people that do have a mental illness, right? To kind of just allow this to happen and make it seem as if we don't control this to a certain degree. Just like, for example, say diabetes, right? Like that it's not a mental illness. Obviously, it's a physical illness, but the way that you make choices, if you're a diabetic, has everything to do, with whether you're going to live, whether you're going to die, and, all those types of things, right? And the same thing is true for mental illness. And when we fail to hold people accountable for that, the sad part is that we're also failing to empower them with knowing that it's actually in their control, that they have the ability to make certain choices and have a different outcome. And if we hide that truth, we not only, have a society where people keep doing these violent crimes and nobody can acknowledge what's happening, but we also deprive these, people of the good news, that this actually is something that is in their control. They may not be able to control if they have a mental illness, but they can absolutely control how they handle it.
Right. It's almost like telling them that they can't get better. Right. Yeah. We need to do all this stuff for you because you can't do anything for yourself. So then they stay in the state that they're in and nothing gets better.
Yeah, and it actually kind of contributes to a lot of stigma about mental health because we're constantly reading about people with mental illnesses doing these violent crimes. And these are people that shouldn't really be necessarily out on the street having the right to make these types of choices in the first place.
Right. So I got one more topic I want to talk about before I get to the book. You said this, I don't know if it was a tweet I saw or something, but it kind of made me think. I was like, oh, I haven't heard that. You had this odd thing you said. You said that free speech was good for mental health.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. I am so glad you brought that up. Free speech. Oh, my goodness. It is so under attack, and I just do not understand why. As a clinical psychologist, I know that putting things into words helps people, to solve problems. Evolutionary psychologists have long speculated that part of the whole reason that human beings evolved to such a sophisticated species is because of our gift of language, that we can talk things through, that we can learn from each other, that we can develop ideas. And frankly, even if somebody's saying something I really don't like, I'd rather know about it, right? If it's that bad that it causes me to want to keep my distance from them, fine. I'd rather that they go ahead and say it. When we have to keep things inside, it actually, I think, increases a sense of mistrust amongst us because we don't really know what anybody's really thinking or really feeling. And we don't get to actually challenge and debunk truly awful ideas, right? And, Charles, to your point as well about these, endless safe spaces, right, that are just creating a bunch of like super duper soft people that don't have any resilience, right? Which is the funny part because the APA and psychologists, they all love to talk about resiliency, right? Well, one of the ways that we develop resiliency is by learning to interact with people that are different from us and to exchange ideas and agree to disagree and discover our boundaries and all that stuff. So, I mean, honestly, I get it. Like there is speech that I hate. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of speech I hate, but would I ever in a million years want to shut it down? Absolutely never.
Well, Shamika and I are really interesting on, I don't know if I think we're right, but I don't know how rare we are, but we are full on, like, we get to know each other. We have these conversations with people and we both coming from different, places and thinking about it differently, come to kind of similar things about this kind of stuff. I remember telling people about, I don't like the fact that I don't even, now see, I'm policing my own speech. I don't know if you can say it anymore.
Say it, Charles. Just say it.
Can you say it, Shamika? I don't know
Say it. Cut the
I don't know if
bull.
they're like, take it out, take the video down if I say it. But I don't like the fact that not only are they telling people they can't say nigger, but now they're telling black people they can't say it anymore. I know black people have been banned on Twitter. It used to be, we don't want white people saying racist stuff. And people are like, well, why do you want to say it? I don't say it in rap songs. I don't try to police what people do. I'm not a big proponent of it. I'm not saying a white person who said it is a good guy. I'm not some, white supremacist apologist. My take on it is that I want to be able, when I get mad at some racist person did something to me, I want to be able to say what happened and say what he said without being blocked from Twitter for using the word. That's what he didn't say in word. He didn't say, you know what? No, I want to say what he said, right? That's the first thing. But then the other piece where I bring in Shamika doesn't seem to be bothered by things like, that's one thing we have in common a lot. Like, I remember telling the story about, since I already said nigga once, about somebody saying, because most black people, they talk about this all the time and talk about what they do in a situation. But to be honest, Shamika can correct me, most black people, especially if they're younger nowadays, have never had anybody say that to them before. And I told the story about how I was sitting at a bar and a drunk guy came in and was saying, look, there's a nigger sitting at the bar. And I'm watching TV and I didn't even turn. I said, why don't you buy this nigga a drink? And then I just kept drinking. I mean, it wasn't going to end my world. I was like,
Right.
whatever. And people shocked when I tell them that. Shamika, we were talking to Batya Angasagan, and Batya asked her about growing up in North Carolina. I was like, oh, it's the South. What do you think about Confederate flags? And Stamika was like, I'm supposed to be bothered by those, right? Tell her about that. Like, you don't get bothered by this stuff either, right, Shamika?
It doesn't bother me at all. And I don't understand how it bothers people to the point that they can't function. Like, I've gone to the beach in South Carolina. They have all of these shops where they sell Confederate flags. And I remember I took a picture. They had a poster or a cardboard cutout of Trump. I took a picture like with my leg wrapped around the cardboard poster, and people got so upset. Like Tariq Nasheed pulled it out. Oh my God, she's a coon, and she loves white men. Now, mind you, I've never dated a white man, before, but because I took this picture surrounded by Confederate flags, people were so angry. I thought they would mostly be mad at the whole Trump thing, but I think it was the whole, background of a Confederate flag. And I can tell you, when I was in the store, nothing inside of me got angry. Nothing felt, I didn't feel oppressed. I was just in a store that sold Confederate paraphernalia. Big deal. They lost. Who cares? But people get so angry, and like when it comes to nigger, I don't say, nigga.
Right, nigga. Nigga you say. Sometimes you say nigga, you never say nigger.
Yeah, I rarely ever say nigga.
I don't say either one of them.
Yeah, I'll say nigga, especially if I say nigga. Like somebody has done something and I like the audacity, And if I'm rapping along to Snoop Dogg or Ghetto Boys, of course their music is laced with it. But I don't see the big deal with that either. And I don't like saying the N-word. The N-word.
Oh,
because now
I feel like a child.
Yes, like you don't get to tell me what I can and cannot say. Now, you can be offended by it, of course. Like, I wouldn't tell my grandma, nigga. I wouldn't say that to my grandmother. She actually had to grow up in those times where it was offensive to her. With me, I haven't had anybody say that to me. My children haven't, so the weight is not as heavy as it is with, say, my grandmother and her siblings and stuff. So I know how to respect them. But my God, people grow up. It's just a word. When I see people fighting in the, restaurant, say nigga again. Now you're going to go to jail because somebody said something you didn't like? That's foolishness to me.
But I got two other points. One about something you said and one about something Dr. Chloe said to you at the end. One is, so we talked about being offended by the Confederate flag, the N-word. But you said when you posted that video, that post of the picture, and people like Tariq came out and said some things and they called you a coon. Here's one for you. You're not offended by that either.
Nope.
Right? That's the funny thing. They think they're hurting your feelings. We don't care.
Right. At all.
So do you think the black man in a mostly white area that called a nigga at the bar and didn't care, gonna care because some black guy's feelings hurt? So he say, you're a sellout. We don't
Right.
care. And the second thing is, Chloe was saying that there are words that offends her, but she wants to hear them. And we also say that, right? Because we want to know where you stand. I like the days better when somebody at work would say some shady things. You're like, something about him ain't right.
Right.
Because he said, now they're all saying the right thing. So now I can't tell them apart. They're all like, sure wish we had a black manager. That would make this place better. And then they go for the rest of their day being racist like they were before, but they saying all the right things. No, give me the guy that's just saying the inappropriate stuff so I know where I stand.
Yes.
And that's all gone because they're trying to protect me.
Yes.
I don't need that protection.
The ones that say the right things are the ones now that I'm raising the eyebrow to, because I know I sense racism in that, in that John Stewart saying that, we don't have, as black people, we can't achieve the American dream. Check. That's racist to me. Although black people are like sopping it up like a biscuit, John must love us. He understands our
He must love us.
No, I see that as racism, and so they can hide it or try to hide it if they want to. I would much rather hear somebody say, go back to your country and try to figure out what they mean by it than someone.
I'll just say, okay, and then I'll stay where I am. Then I say, okay, I'll go to Indiana next week. I mean,
right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
And no one's really saying it anyway. They act like that everywhere they go. Somebody's telling them to go back to Africa.
Right. Nobody's saying that.
So no one's ever said that to them.
No, exactly.
Right. Let's be real. I'm sorry. We get off the deep end. Dr. Chloe, let's talk about the book now. Unless you wanted to react to our nigger conversation.
No, I just wanted to say I love that there is a place where free speech exists, and I hope that Elon Musk on Twitter is going to restore that, because I do think when we start putting so much power in a word, we have to remember words are supposed to be symbols for things and for feelings. And so when we get to the point where you can't even quote somebody, I think we're obviously devolving in terms of language, so I'm glad I got to be part of your conversation.
Well, thank you. One last thing about the Twitter thing real quick, because it's funny. I mean, so at least it's on tape. We'll see what happens. Hopefully good things will happen. I see why people are optimistic, but I'm kind of sitting back like maybe I'm missing something, doing some back and envelope math. So the biggest shareholder, I get that, but it's 10%. Can't all the other woke people just get together and outweigh his 10%? I mean, everybody's acting like Twitter's now going to be Truth Social or something.
Well, that's what I thought too. But then I learned that previously a guy with 4% was able to get Jack Dorsey out, right? So somehow just that the biggest vote somehow carries the day. But I know what you mean,
but I
Charles.
think it's going to be what the biggest vote
does.
Yeah. Yeah, but if the biggest vote was pushing to the center, they'll pull, move, well, they don't believe in heaven and earth, but they'll move all kinds of things they'll move anything to
well,
stop
that. Well, I hope Elon has more in mind than an edit button. I'll just
I know, me too.
Right, or worse, he's just doing it just to troll people and he does nothing. He's like, I just want to mess with you. So
I don't think he's doing that. Elon, if you're listening, bring it back. We need some free speech. I mean, I think him coming from South Africa and, when he did the Senator Karen thing, I loved that. So, yes. So I have high hopes. I'm an optimist. Elon Musk, bring it home, please.
Well, I do hope he gets an edit button because I'm the worst on my phone. I think every tweet I tweet is misspelled.
True. I mean, I'm the same way.
I really can.
Yeah.
I just don't have the time. But so your book, Nervous Energy, here. Again, thank you. I want to get into, why you wrote it and why both the book and it seems like most of the clients you work with, you focus on a niche group. You focus on people who are high functioning. So why high functioning people?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting thing. The reason I became a clinical psychologist, I mentioned I was a yoga teacher before. So I was teaching private yoga lessons, to be honest, because it was the best way for me to pay the bills, because the private yoga lessons paid a lot better than teaching in groups. And so I was teaching private yoga lessons in New York City with, as you can imagine, a lot of really driven type A people. And they would say like, okay, I want to have work-life balance. So I would teach them balancing yoga poses and then balancing meditations. And we'd make the whole thing blend together, and it was beautiful. And this got me really deeply curious to just know more about the mind and the brain and how it all worked. And so that is why I then, went and got a PhD in clinical psychology. And while I was there, I kind of also discovered that, to some of the points we were discussing earlier, there's more funding and more grant money in defining mental illness and getting a new drug for this or a new treatment for that. Nobody really wanted to study the people who were just doing really great and how we could help them even more, right? Everybody just wanted to talk about like how those people just had privilege problems and how, they were just doing well because of some fluke of society or whatever. And so I just personally got really interested in that. And I guess I have a lot of nervous energy myself. And I found that even like my supervisors and things, when I would want to just work with clients and teach them how to have some tools to take their anxiety and learn that it's not even necessarily an illness. Mother Nature gave us anxiety for a healthy reason, which is that it stimulates preparation behaviors. And so the 9 techniques in the book are about how, I should say the book, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. The 9 techniques in the book are about how we can take that sensation of anxiety and specifically use it to accomplish things, to use it for a constructive reason, the way Mother Nature intended it. And I just didn't feel like a lot of people were doing that. So that was how I started my practice, and it filled up super quick to the point where I had to hire other people. And next thing I knew, I was getting calls from all over the world. And I thought, I want to make this accessible to people. The good news is also that studies have shown that people with anxiety tend to respond pretty well sometimes to self-help because they are detail-oriented. They will read the directions. They will try stuff. And by the way, it is on audiobook too for people that like to listen to stuff too. And that's where it came from. And I've been having so much fun with it.
Well, that's the good thing about the way the book is laid out. It has, these points. You got your technique. So if someone wants to read it like self-help and just find the thing and read it. But you also do a great job of using examples both from anonymous clients and yourself. And I have to talk about one because I was reading it and I thought about Shamika. Shamika, you haven't gotten to this point. You're going to get a kick out of this. So tell everybody about, because I think in the example you were talking about how you're talking about high functioning people and how, let's say they decide to have therapy and they're going to find a therapist. So all the other parts of their lives, they're trying to manage as best they can. But here they feel that this is an authority figure, so they have a different view about that. And so you try to tell them why it's important for there. That's a really big decision. You need to make sure it's the right fit. You just don't pick anybody just because, well, they have a PhD. So tell us, you use yourself as an example. So tell Shamika and the listeners and viewers the story about the therapist you saw when you were new in New York in Chelsea, and how you had warning signs going off, but you still went to see her.
Well, Charles, you really did read the whole book. Thank you. So yeah, what I did is I shared a chapter in the book about how it's actually sometimes harder for people who are basically okay. They just want a therapist to help them take it to the next level. It can be harder for them to find someone that's really going to help them because a lot of therapists themselves are not necessarily as on point as really, truly high functioning people. And as I started therapy myself when I was like 17, I had, some teenage troubles. And basically at that point in my life, any stable, caring adult was going to be a good influence on me. And that was just good enough. But then when I got to my early 20s and I was in New York, went out to find a therapist, just assumed it was going to be a good experience like all the others, had been. And I showed up, and the woman answered the door, and I want to be sensitive about how I say this, but she appeared to be a rather low-functioning person herself. So her office, for example, probably had 1,000 old newspapers in it. Like, she was an active hoarder, I think. And her teeth were basically completely gray. And there's gray, disturbingly, I don't know, like what was going on there. But there's nothing wrong with that, of, even just having gray teeth. But there is something in terms of, like, especially for a high functioning person, you want to model a certain level even of empathy. So that she should have been able, hopefully, to anticipate my reaction and say, hi, you might notice my office. I'm going through a renovation, or I'm going through some dental work, don't mind that. Because, of course, the way we care for our teeth suggests the way that we care for ourselves and our bodies. And it actually does matter in terms of mental health. But she just didn't, acknowledge any of this. It was actually my first time ever rejecting a therapist. Up to that point, every therapist I had ever seen, I just felt like, wow, this person's helping me. But it was the first time I ever had that experience. So there's a chapter in the book about how when you do reach a certain level of functioning, and really even at any level of functioning, you should always feel in charge and not assume that just because somebody's a doctor, kind of as we discussed earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to follow them.
Wow.
I'm sure Shamika has something to say about your experience.
Yeah, I'm just, I get a little bit distracted when someone's missing a tooth, like that side tooth. And I know it happens a lot of times when you get to a certain age, but if you're supposed to be someone of status, and you're supposed to be well off, I just don't understand how you let your teeth go down. So the fact that
self-care.
Yeah, like you walked in and her teeth were gray.
All of them. Like,
there's nothing wrong with gray teeth, though, Shamika.
Yes,
and I mean gray, like dark storm cloud gray,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
No.
And then again, like literally 1,000 newspapers
All
from
over the
years.
place, Shamika.
Yeah.
Everywhere. The papers
Yeah.
were everywhere.
Yeah, that's crazy. Excuse me, ma'am. I'm not going to be able to do this.
I gotta go.
I bet she had one of those lines on her tongue, Shamika. I didn't check that, but I bet she had one.
So, Dr. Chloe, what do you want to leave people with from the book that would make them buy it, and why it will help them, harness their nervous energy?
Yeah, so the big thing to know, again, is that there is a healthy function to anxiety. There's this thing about society today that we want to say, oh, anxiety, everybody's got mental illness. A lot of times anxiety is actually the sign of a person who is a live wire that is engaged. And so if we want to harness the power of that anxiety and use it the way Mother Nature intended, then either Amazon, wherever books are sold, or go to nervousenergybook.com, and you can connect with me on social media. All my social handles are there at nervousenergybook.com, and there's some free goodies as well.
Well, I can't let you go before going to Shamika, though. Dr. Chloe's been fabulous, but she is the third or fourth PhD in psychology we've had on. And you've tried to sneak your way to therapy with all of them, and you didn't do it this time. Mm-hmm. Did she do something wrong? Did she have great teeth? Did it look like she couldn't help you? Because everybody else, you're like, so what if a person...
No, actually, I was a sponge here. So I learned, and I told you I was going through people in my head. I learned that people that may be suffering from depression may have anger that they need to get through. And so I took that little mental note there that I can now ask them, so what are you angry about? Is there, is there something that you feel that you didn't, have a chance to address? So I've been taking mental notes. And also when she said, so I used to have anxiety issues as a child. Do people grow out of it, or did I just learn to deal with it better? Because I used to get so worked up that I would hyperventilate and pass out. I don't do that anymore, but I still get really nervous. Like, especially when I have to get in front of a camera, I still have some nervousness. Not to the point where I'm hyperventilating and pass out, but I want to know, like, did I just learn to deal with that? Or do you just get older and say, hey, it's nothing I can do? Because my daughter now suffers from panic attacks. One of them.
And don't tell her she's in front of a camera right now.
Shamika,
I'm still nervous.
Well, so, I mean, one of the things, Shamika, is that you probably learned, just through simple exposure and experience, right? That the experience wasn't actually going to be life-threatening. So your body probably learned to ratchet down, the fear response just through simple exposure. But also, I would say, being on camera is supposed to make you a little nervous, right? A little on point, a little extra, right? If you ever had a situation where you were just like, whatever, and you just kind of felt like it wasn't a thing, that you were poised and ready to be on point with people, I would actually say, hey, maybe we need to ramp up the engagement. You know what I mean? So you probably just through experience have found that sweet spot. And, thanks for sharing as well about your daughter and the panic stuff. There's, stuff in the book as well. I'm not saying it's a substitute for, therapy if that's what's needed. I don't know. But I want people to know that if they do have that, anxiety or extra strong reaction sometimes that just means you have a live wire inside of you, and we just need to know how to point it in the right direction.
Oh, good.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. Just all over the place.
Well, she is Dr. Chloe Carmichael, clinical psychologist and author of Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. Dr. Chloe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure, Charles and Shamika. To say, Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the U.S. of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.